So I was thinking of starting with meditation and then kind of a round robin introduction where you have, I would say, I wouldn't say as much time as you want, but a good positioning statement like who you are, why you're here, and what your relation with Savitri is historically, and where your curiosity levels lie, and then the next after that, I'd love to talk about kind of how I've made some suggestions, but those are only suggestions. I'd love to talk about how people want this circle to be, what people want this circle to be. And I just remembered that, yeah, that we have a time limitation. I think that I think we're set for an hour and a half, but someone needs to go in 45 minutes. Sorry, I forget who. I just saw it in the thread.
Definitely, I have another meeting, but
okay.
Yeah.
Good. So there's that one, and then the final with the remaining time, I'd like to do a walk through the narrative arc to get us kind of positioned and talk about Savitri and talk about reading Savitri. And I know that Marco Masi and Andrea and John Robert have a lot of input, and Mary's kind of, there's the three people in the middle of my screen anyway. I don't know if it's oriented in the same way for everyone, but they might be more new at this. So anyway, that's the general. So I'll facilitate, and I might just call on people in order on my screen to start off the personal positioning sharing. But let's start with 3 minutes or so meditation. Welcome, everybody. I'll start off the sharing. Um, because I don't have the host privilege yet, normally I could mute everyone, but I think a Zoom etiquette point is to mute when you're not talking. So I know, Andrea, you don't have much experience with Zoom. There's a mute button in the bottom right. Good, nice. That was quick. And Mary, you're also not muted. Thank you. Good, good. So I've been really looking forward to this for a number of reasons. And I'd like to keep my sharing to about 5 minutes and kind of ask everyone 5 minutes feels about right. I'm in Felton, California, and I was introduced to this forum through a mutual friend of Marco Morelli and mine, Eric Weiss. He introduced me to Marco because the group here at Infinite Conversations was starting to undertake the Life Divine at a pace of 50 pages a week. And that's what we did last year. And it was challenging and really beautiful. And I enjoyed the conversations were lively, and what Marco Morelli has started with the forum here, and a lot of Geoffrey is a big part, and there's a number of people that are an integral part of this forum. There's some bright minds, and John Robert has a group that he started in a Savitri group that he started in Placerville. That historically, for me, the Savitri groups have really just been reading groups, not much discussion. But I read a lot one-on-one with John Robert on Zoom, and we pause and ask a lot of questions. What does Sri Aurobindo mean by this? What's he saying here? What's he referring to in all these pronouns? So there's like an intention to slow down and really go a lot deeper. And that's what, when John Robert was talking about his Placerville group, I thought of the Infinite Conversations group and how it would be possibly a nice approach if that's how we want to approach it here. But also to have a recorded discussion and reading circle that people who aren't immediately part of the circle around the globe can go to and watch if they're interested, and perhaps join if they want. Yeah, so I got into Savitri in 2003. That was the year that I had my first pass through Savitri. It's funny, I don't even know if Andrea remembers this, but she loaned a friend of mine the book Sat Prem by Sat Prem, called Sri Aurobindo, or The Adventure of Consciousness, which is a line from Savitri, The Adventure of Consciousness and Joy. So we went to a dinner party through a mutual friend of ours. That's how we met. And we went to a dinner party, and another friend of mine walked home with Andrea's copy of The Adventure of Consciousness. And my friend didn't read it at all. And a month later, she gave it back to me to return to Andrea. And I didn't return it to Andrea immediately. I held on to it. And I'm like, what is this? And started reading it. And immediately, as soon as he started quoting Sri Aurobindo, I ordered a pile of books from India. And in that pile of books was Savitri, because at that point I was 28 or 29 and had been a lifetime lover of poetry already. I started reading poetry early and immersing myself. And so that year I also discovered Savitri. I don't think I've stopped reading since. And John Robert and I have had a group that gets together every spring equinox, and we read in a yurt at an ashram here in California, and we read Savitri start to finish for 4 days in a circle. And we've been doing that now for 8 years, and Andrea's joined us for the last 4 years. And so there's a few of us that just that are I can't speak for anyone else, but I'm a Savitri junkie. if if I could identify as a junkie for consciousness and bathing with the mantra and allowing it to seep into the different parts of my being that it goes to, that would be my form of being a junkie. Yeah. So I'm I'm complete for now. I didn't look at the time, but I'm just sensing that that's somewhere around 5 minutes. I'll leave it open until everyone shares. Whoever wants to go next, just signal by unmuting and self-regulate somewhere 4 to 6 minutes or something.
So I thought I'd go next, Mateo, partly because I think, although you've taken on the leadership of running the reading group, it was kind of my suggestion at the beginning of the year. So it came out of the Aurobindo reading that we did last year, and which was, as you say, a challenging but a wonderful experience. Certainly my first encounter with Aurobindo. I think when the discussion of the life divine came up, I thought, well, who the hell is Aurobindo? So, I had no understanding of what was involved at the beginning. But we read some bits of Savitri. I think you were involved in those meetings, Mateo, and during the reading of the life divine. And I'm drawn to long epic poems. I reread the Iliad and the Odyssey a couple of years ago, and I'm probably one of the only people I know who's read Kazantzakis' The Odyssey, a Modern Sequel, which is a very long epic poem based on the Odyssey, and Paradise Lost and things like that. So I love the long epic poetry form, and I'm drawn to it. And at the beginning of the year, I put up on the Infinite Conversations site my wish list for the year for reading groups. I had 3 items on it. One was a Bateson reading, and we did the reading group for Bateson. The second was a reading of my own novel, and we did the reading group for my own novel. And the third was the Savitri reading. So I am thrilled that you've taken this on, Mateo, because it's a dream come true, literally. and I'm also setting up, because the original idea, or at least I know Mateo and some of the people here are more interested in the Savitri reading per se, but we've set it up every 2 weeks to be the Savitri reading. And then in the intervening weeks, we're going to run a parallel and related discussion about the relationship between Savitri, Milton's Paradise Lost, Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell in particular, and also Walt Whitman's poetry, which has some interesting crosslinks as well. Unfortunately, the time is different because we originally set up the other meeting. I think there was some confusion over the time in terms of when you were available, Mateo. And we set it early, this other meeting earlier in the day, because we were trying to meet the constraints of time of another person who's not here now because this is the wrong time for him. So we set it earlier in the day. And I realized for California people, it's probably too early. It's 7 o'clock in the morning for you folks. So, and even for Marco and folk in Boulder, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. So that's still a bit early. But but anyway, that's the time it's set up. And so we're going to be looking at the relationship between Milton, Blake, Whitman, and Aurobindo in the context of Savitri and the crosslinks between the two. So, so it'll maybe inform some of the discussion here, but it'll be a separate thread as well. So I'm really excited about it. I gather it's good. So you talked about 4 days, Matthew. I gather this is a 2-year exercise, which itself is kind of amazing, because I think the Life Divine was about 8 months altogether, something like that, that we worked on that. But 2 years is a chunk of one's life. So that's kind of interesting. So I am thrilled to be here, thrilled to meet new people, thrilled to have Marco Masi back in the crowd, because he's one of my favorite people, and we're talking about doing some work together. So yeah, I'll stop there. Oh, I probably should have mentioned that.
Geoffrey.
I should mention that I'm based in Quebec City in Canada. Yeah.
You took the words out of my mouth. And because you said Cosmos host, I don't know if you said your name in the beginning, but that's Geoffrey.
Yeah, Geoffrey Edwards, yeah.
Maybe I take the opportunity to connect to what you already said, Geoffrey. Just a service announcement. I sent you an email. So, okay. I'm sorry for being late for that. Okay, then now I may introduce myself. Well, my name is written there, Marco Masi. Masi is an American English pronunciation. I'm originally come from Italy. Nowadays I'm living in Germany, but I'm also German. And well, and how did I get involved in the yoga? Well, it was 2.5 decades ago, where first I studied classical yoga without any preference. And then only later I discovered, so to speak, the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo. As many, as also Mateo hinted at the fact that many discover Sri Aurobindo through Satprem. In my case, it was not the adventure of consciousness, but he wrote also many other books. In my case, it was the trilogy. The trilogy of the divine materialism, and there was three other books. Now I don't remember anymore because it's more than 20 years ago. But that's how I have been introduced in Aurobindo's yoga. And yes, much later, this means what is it now? A year ago, more or less, I discovered the sessions, the Zoom sessions on the infinite conversation on the live divine. So I immediately jumped in. And there I knew also Geoffrey and Marco Morelli and also Mateo. And Mateo told me that there are these Savitri sessions, and so I decided to jump in here too. So this is very broadly my introduction.
I would like to go next because I noticed that Marco Masi chuckled when Geoffrey was talking about the time. And that's because when we did the Life Divine readings, there was a contingent in Germany that was reading along with us. And I believe we were doing that at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. And I think it was 3 in the morning in Germany, something like that. 2 in the morning, yeah. So there were 2 or 3 of you, maybe 4 at some points that were participating. And so I am going to try to make the 8 a.m. Alternate week readings of Milton, Blake, Whitman, et al. And I'm going to try to make these as well. I may not be able to make every session because this actually falls kind of in my workday, and I have a reprieve today, and I'm going to try to work out consistent reprieves in the coming weeks in order to be able to participate. But if I can't participate live, I would like to at least follow the reading, because that's why I'm here. And this for me is a deepening of the experience or the engagement or the inquiry that that began for me last summer with the Life Divine reading. That was my first real-time reading Aurobindo, although I'd been familiar with some of his ideas, and I'd been familiar with the integral philosophy more generally, integral thinking more generally, through other channels. And so my name is Marco Morelli, and well, I'm a poet, a writer, and a editor. Co-founded a literary journal called Metapsychosis. It's currently online, but we're working on publishing projects, print publishing projects, and various other kinds of experimental and almost like fusionary, like fusing some different like lines of inquiry or ways of being or ways of thinking. I studied philosophy and comparative literature in college, and I've always felt these different parts of myself. I also started practicing Zen meditation and yoga, and for me, the entryway toward which I found Aurobindo was through Ken Wilber, whose work I discovered a couple of years after college, and kind of gave me an intellectual framework for combining these different parts of myself. And that's what brought me to Colorado, where I currently live in Longmont, Colorado. I worked with his Integral Institute between 2003 and 2007. Got married, I met somebody, not directly through there, but kind of in the milieu, and ended up staying here, but parting ways from, some of that particular, I think, approach, and spending maybe the next 7 to 8 years much more focused on art and literature, that really being where my heart is. And so as part of that, though, I became aware of many different integral thinkers like Jean Gebser and Teilhard de Chardin and Henri Bergson, and there are various others who, although Aurobindo doesn't as much refer to them, they often refer to Aurobindo as being a kind of fountainhead of this way of understanding, or way of this. It's a metaphysics. It's more. It's obviously it's more than just a philosophy. It's more than just a way of thinking. There's a lot to it, and that's part of what is so compelling, I guess, to me, is that in Aurobindo's work, as I've been discovering it, there's a luminous fusion, I think, of the poetic, the philosophical, the spiritual, the visionary, and also, I believe, through the integral yoga, a way of actualizing or integrating the consciousness into one's life. So that's part of what I'm interested in, passionate about, and what the Cosmos Cooperative is about, is providing a space for these thinkers and practitioners and teachers and poets and artists to mingle and to see what we can create out of it, something hopefully better from a structural and organizational and cultural perspective than what is mainly going on, like in the broader internet and social media sphere and so forth. Some alternative to that, some path to the future, a future we would more desire than the one that is portrayed to us conventionally and typically. I think that's what I'm attracted to in Aurobindo, especially, is I think he's coming from the future in some way. So that's what I'm looking forward to exploring with you all, and I'm so glad to be here. And thank you, Mateo and Geoffrey and Marco, and very nice to meet you, and looking forward to hearing about you, Mary and Andrea and John. Now I'll pause there.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mary. I'm grateful to be here, meet some new friends. I'm new to studying the works of Sri Aurobindo, been participating in the Synthesis of Yoga group that Mateo had invited me to join. And we've known each other for, I don't know how many years now, but a few to several through first asana and friendship development. I'm a student, have been a student of art and interior design and architecture and gardening, and worked as a producer for children's theater and done costume design and scenic design. And about 10 years ago, I got really more serious in studying meditation in my asana practice, and that turned into me teaching asana and mindfulness for several years. And then just a year ago, I kind of uprooted with my husband and my dogs and moved from California to Connecticut to live in this giant old house that really called to us. So we moved my parents in with us. That's primarily the reason for our move, was to be able to support my parents as they age and be closer to some East Coast based family. So it was a time I felt to kind of take a sabbatical from more of the outward teaching and practice and really turn inward deeply into this renovation and restoration project, which is becoming kind of in my heart just the development of a very, very healing retreat space for family and friends, and maybe someday beyond that. But I'm also just grateful to have the time to be able to really turn more inward, and I consider these studies and learning more about Sri Aurobindo an integral, if you will, part of that. I'm really enjoying it. Myth and storytelling has always been part of my life, and I love poetry as well. I was a homeschooling parent for 18 years, and I think my sort of brain and heart and soul just is drawn to sort of a thematic approach to processing material and sharing it with others. And so I'm very excited to delve into Savitri. I was able to attend one reading session in person with Mateo maybe 2 years ago and really enjoyed it. And I'm just so glad that it's sort of come around to give me the opportunity to explore it on a regular basis with all of you. So thank you for having me here.
I was waiting for John Robert to kick in, but here I go. So my name is Andrea, and this is very special to feel so connected with all of you. It's amazing. I have not had this experience through the, whatever you call this, cyberspace. So I was fortunate enough in 1972 to actually travel, hitchhike the hippie trail from Amsterdam to India, and ended up in Pondicherry. I had the amazing experience of seeing Mother in person. It's always very moving for me to even mention it, because it changed everything for me. It's like looking into her eyes. There was a sudden recognition between her and me that there was no difference. It was truly astonishing, and a total recognition. Oh, it's you. It's you. And we felt the same. She and I, we looked at each other. There was a long time. There seemed to be absolutely nothing happening. Just this incredible silence and space. And then all of a sudden, we were recognizing each other. So when I turned away from her, I had barely set 2 steps into the room, and my tears just started running, and I wept for 3 days. It's like not only seeing her, but at the same time recognizing myself. It's like all my veils were torn in that moment, and was coming home to my soul. And this feeling of having been somehow waiting for this experience, this direct experience of the divine, not just in the other, but in myself, for lifetimes. So 3 days later, my boyfriend and I had decided we were just going to be there for 3 days and then leave. And when I woke up on the 3rd day, it was clear that I had my feet back on the ground. And he looked at me and said, "So, you ready to go?" I said, "I'm not going anywhere." So I took him to the train. And I lived in first a few months in Pondicherry in the ashram, and then went to Oroville. I'm kind of assuming that all of you have some idea of Oroville. Is that true? So I lived there for 6.5 years, and both my daughters were born there. And then we came to America. So I met an American man in Daniel in Oroville, and we had 2 little girls. And then we ended up in this country. So I have read Savitri since 1972. And it's been a constant companion, except I'm mostly just reading when I read with others. There's something happens when I listen and when I am able to read myself out loud to others. There's a more powerful transmission happens for me than if I'm on my own. So I'm very happy we get to do this. Our little group in Santa Cruz has been, so I'm in Santa Cruz, California. Mateo and I are within a 15-minute drive from each other. And we were in a reading group together for years, starting with June and anyway. Ida, thank you. And so then June passed, and Ida is not really with us mentally anymore. And so our group has dwindled a little. And so this is lovely to have a steady connection. And I'm really looking forward to this, to reading together. It's a wonderful thing. A little bit personally, so my oldest daughter is living in Santa Cruz with 2 little boys, so I get to be the lucky grandma. And my other daughter is in Alaska, Anchorage, and I am a retired healer. I felt, so I had a hands-on energetic healing practice, acupressure, Reiki, polarity, and combined with hypnotherapy and process work. And there were numbers of times when I would have my hands on a person and they would experience mother, which was really pretty amazing. I just had her picture in my healing room, but I never said anything about it because that's not what they were there for. But they said, "That woman over there." So that was very special, this feeling she had. The second time I saw mother in person, I was so confused. I knew I had to be open to receive, and I had no idea how to be open. What do you do? How do you be open? So when I actually came in front of her, I think I was a mess. And she just started chuckling. And then she indicated for me to put my head on her lap, and she stroked my head. Like stroking a child, saying, "It's okay, it's okay, it's okay, you're okay." And so somehow that energy, I think somehow sometimes that was allowed to come through me to others. Anyway, I'm retired now, and this is enough out of me today. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is John Robert. I live in Placerville, California. And people always say, where's that? It's halfway between Sacramento in the Great Valley and Lake Tahoe, which is on the other side of the Sierra Nevada. I live here with my wife, and I'm really pleased to be here to meet those of you that I haven't met before, and to reunite with Andrea and Mateo and Savitri. My first experience with Savitri was probably 1982, maybe the winter of 1982. I was living by myself in a little town, eastern side of the Sierra Nevada mountains in California called Bishop. I was in the middle of my year of light, and I had been introduced to Sri Aurobindo and Mother by a spiritual teacher in Sacramento. And at some point she said, it's time for you to go off on your own. I wound up in Bishop, and I spent a year there. I didn't know anybody when I arrived, and didn't know where I was going when I arrived. And I ordered Savitri. I don't remember what the inspiration was, but I remember I read it by myself in my room from beginning to end. And I remember reading the first canto, which I assume we're going to start next time, maybe. It took me a couple of, I don't remember how long it took me, but it was such an effort to be present to the magnificent blizzard of imagery that was coming through there, that at the end of it, I lay down on the floor and slept for 2 hours. So I've been a Savitri lover for, I don't know, 30 some years now. One of my really wonderful experiences with Savitri was I lived in Oroville for a couple of years in South India. And one of the communities there was a person who was also a lover of Savitri. And so we started reading Savitri together in the morning. And then another person joined us. He was a newcomer and wasn't familiar with Sri Aurobindo at all. And when we would read together, he would stop and say, well, what is that? What does that mean? He was a very, very bright man. And I found that I had been reading it, kind of skimming over things really easily without fully understanding what the words were. I mean, not to mention the deeper meaning of it, but just understanding the metaphors. And so we spent a lot of time, we would read something and then talk about it. And then when the woman who I started with Bhavana, she went out of the country, out of Oroville for a while. And I wound up taking over a Savitri group with some Korean Orovillians who had very little English. And so again, I was really immersed in just what the English was and what it was saying. And we would maybe spend an hour just going through one page. So Savitri is certainly one of the loves of my life, and I never can get enough of it. 2 years of it coming up, and I hope I maybe session, and I'm looking forward to knowing everyone here better and learning together and celebrating and suffering through all the light and dark and magnificence of Savitri.
Thank you, everyone. That was lovely. So I'd like to transition now to what are our ideas of how to form the circle, and I'll talk briefly about what I proposed on the forum. And I'd love to hear, but I want that to be a suggestion. I don't want what I've proposed on the forum to necessarily be the formation. I would like to integrate and fuse with the people present here. The suggestion, I think the time is set, 10 a.m. Pacific on the 1st and 3rd Wednesdays of the month. I wish I could make the other. I love Whitman. I love Blake. I love what you're doing in the other 2 weeks, but my 2nd and 4th Wednesday is piled with meetings, business and nonprofit. And I could do 7 in the morning, but then it would just, yeah, I can't. I probably wouldn't. I may be able to check in on the video for those meetings and track it on the forum, but I can't be present. I wish that I could. So yeah, the time I think is set. And for however long it takes, there's the suggestion is to have a reading and discussion circle without a timeline, so that as slow or as fast as we wanted to go would be acceptable. We could go with that pace, whatever pace the group wanted to. And the original suggestion is to break the canto into, not break the canto into sections. Sri Aurobindo has already done that. Each canto has section breaks, but utilizing those section breaks to have one reading pass through and then take up another reading for discussion. And like I mentioned before, perhaps tracking pronouns and meanings of things and looking at sentences and things like that. And then possibly having another pass through it and then moving on, another just straight reading pass through it, and then moving on to the subsequent section. In that way, we can kind of stop at the 1.5 hour mark and pick up there for the next meeting. Anyway, this is only an idea. I've actually never met like this. Almost all of the circles that I've been involved in are reading circles. So I'd love to hear from other people what their thoughts are and what their needs are.
So I need to leave in a few minutes. I just wanted to say I do love the idea of the multiple readings out loud. I think the sonority of the language almost demands a kind of resonance, right? And so this multiple reading for me allows us to breathe the resonance of the text and be present for it in a way that if we rush through it, we wouldn't get at all. So I love taking this slow, and yeah. So maybe I'm all for that kind of approach. I just wanted to say before I left, because I didn't come into this a little bit in my introduction, but so I am a scientist, I am a physicist, as is Marco Mazzi, and so we share that grounding. And right now I'm reading about quantum consciousness theory, which is kind of relevant in this context because it has this forward-moving movement and this backward-moving movement. And in Savitri and our relationship with Aurobindo, we have these both currents going on at the same time. So I don't want to hit you over the head with quantum theory. So I won't go into it. We can talk about it a bit more as it comes up. But I think it is an interesting cross-current, as it were, with this discussion. So I'm going to stop there and just drop back into the background, and at some point I'll disappear, but not because I don't want to be here.
So I'm interested in discovering what how our circle wants to read, and I think it's a good idea to start off with an idea, maybe Mateo's idea, but I am expecting that the feelings and needs and interests of the circle will, sooner or later, let us know what the process of reading will be like. And those ones that I described when I was giving my introduction seem to fit the situation, that situation, and other situations seem to ask for a different kind of thing. The language is so magnificent that it's always there, and I'm always wanting to go back to it. But I'm also really enjoy it's like the discussions are often just kind of celebrations or dives into the language, which are wonderful and enriching because people bring different things to it, and consciousness gets widened that way.
And just as an information, what I found a bit helpful for me, because maybe because I'm too intellectual, and I can't refrain from trying to understand, even though more or less everyone agrees that Savitri, at least Savitri, is not something that you have to understand, but it is a mantric poem. Huh? It is something that you must feel. It is something with which you have to resonate with it independently from what your brain or your mind understands. But I think the others, most of you already know that, but perhaps for those who have never read Savitri, at least for me, it was quite helpful to have an introduction, also this description, a summary of Savitri, which eventually I can give you. The one I found quite helpful. I send it to you on the chat for everyone, and because it is a short introduction that describes a bit about what it is about. Because if someone is completely, especially if you don't know the yoga of Sri Aurobindo, but also if you know the yoga of Sri Aurobindo, for me it is perhaps the most difficult reading in some sense, Savitri, because I always want to know what does it mean by that, even though you will not be able to escape the fact that everyone reads something different in it. But in any case, I found this introduction, and where every canto is summarized briefly in a couple of pages, even less. Most cantos in one page. the first canto in 2 or 3 pages, but so it gave me a frame where position myself when reading Savitri, and maybe it may be helpful. Another, so it's just, I don't know if it might be helpful for you or not. I just give you this information because I felt it to do for some reason. I found also an interesting introduction to Savitri by Debashish Banerjee in a meeting that I suppose Mateo was present there, because I hear your I think to hear your voice in the background, and it's eventually I can send you also here. It is a video to a YouTube video where he makes an introduction, an overall introduction on Savitri. It's not just that short. It's, I think, 3 hours. I don't know. I don't remember now. And also that I found that quite helpful to understand, first of all, what's all about before going into the details and into the mantra itself in every verse and canto. So that's what I wanted to say.
So I would like to talk a little bit just about the reading itself. For those of you who haven't read out loud the Savitri, even as the language is just beyond extraordinary, it is really recommended to read it as normal language, to not make it sound like poetry. It's not about rhyming, or the rhythm is in the language itself. And it's not any particular form. It's like, it's a very free, creative writing that Sri Aurobindo did. My understanding is that it just came straight down. He just wrote it. He didn't have to think about it. I like it when we read slowly and enunciate as clearly as we can. And like every sentence is like a transmission.
So we're getting a nice blending of how to read, some input on how to read, and there's also the structure that that I proposed, and John Robert kind of added that the group it's going to be nice to see what the group wants and needs as it unfolds and as we're going forward. The one thing I've been thinking that it would be nice for me to facilitate for a time and then pass that on, like maybe get us going for 2 or 3 months, so 6 sessions or so, and then maybe pass that on to someone else. The facilitator, I think just by definition of the word, is to make it easy to meet, right? From the Spanish fácil, right? Facilitate, to make things easy, rather than be the center of things, just kind of work on keeping the flow going. And one thing is, I personally don't like to do like 1-page reading and then stopping at a period. There's something really complete about a section. So this is only a thought. I may, at facilitating for 2 to 4 months or something, I was thinking of maybe just keeping a reading list so that there is egalitarianism going around, so that everyone gets a chance to read, but maybe everyone won't get a chance to read every time. Maybe we start by we've suggested reading a section completely, then discussing a section, then reading it completely. That might only really be 2 readers, and that might be an hour and a half there. So I'll kind of sense into it if everyone wants, and we can revisit what it means to facilitate, and we can revisit how the group is going. And I think it would be good to just keep checking in with that. And I would like to talk a little bit more about reading, and if we have time, to start introducing the narrative arc.
So, yeah, Mateo, it is my experience when we have read together in a group that there are smaller breaks sometimes between sections, like little indentations. And that actually, if someone feels they've read enough, sometimes your voice goes a little awkward, and to just stop whenever it's right for you, if that is before the break. And in my experience, we have pretty much always been able to go around the circle within an hour and a half reading. Now, we did not include special time for discussion, which I actually do like very much. I think it'll enhance the focus on what we have read for sure. So we'll see how it goes.
Just for a little bit of information for people that are not familiar with Savitri. So the section breaks that Mateo's talking about, I think, it's like a blank line in a canto. So you have an empty line. Canto goes along with text lines following lines, and then there's an empty line. So it looks like an obvious break in the text. And then I stopped because Zoom said your internet connection is unstable. So then what Andrea was talking about is sometimes there's a paragraph indent. And there are other times when Sri Aurobindo starts, he finishes a certain sequence of ideas and imagery, and then he starts a new one. It's related, but it's a new one with nothing, with no marker except a period. So there are all kinds of different things like that will come up, and that we'll get familiar with, as we go through it. And some passages are really, really, it's like a blizzard, a tsunami of just a downpour of images. And in fact, he talks about that in one of his letters, that the way he writes, he calls this mystical poetry. He says the way he writes is it's just a downpour of image piled upon image, upon image, upon image. And sometimes it's like to break the mind. It's like you can't do anything with it logically, but there's a sense that comes. So there's all these different aspects of the poem that and more, I'm sure, that we'll find as we go through it. But I think I like Mateo's idea of maybe giving an outline of the story. Like what's kind of the bare frames of the story, because this Savitri is not just it's so much, but it partly hangs in an external sense on the story of Savitri. So there's a story, there's a narrative that happens going all the way through the poem. And that I've found is very helpful just to know where I am, to have some orientation, to understand, well, what part of the story, what is the story, and what part of the story are we reading about now?
I just want to express the preference that I don't have any particular preferences other than to go along with what is collectively congeals through the group. This being my first time, I really don't know what to expect. I of course have browsed through and looked at the language, and I know that I want to read it. But if I just to experience the language, just to experience the felt sense and this cascade of images and the concatenation of ideas, or however it's cantically constructed, I think will be very pleasurable. I enjoy reading aloud. I enjoy hearing the poetic voice read, and I think that the mix of voices will be very interesting, and the way that the poem, the poetry is transmuted or interpreted or reflected through our voices, I think is part of what's interesting to me as well. That we're not just, and this is verging outside of this particular context, but we're not just representing something static, but we're actually enacting something living. And so I like that we bring that intentionality to it, that this is a living thing. That's my feeling about it anyway. So thanks.
I would just offer that for me, sometimes in the practice of being in a group setting and reading, that there may come a moment of either really feeling like I grok something or, being utterly lost. And so I'm wondering if anyone might be open to, with the experience of the reader in the moment, if there comes one of those moments, perhaps the reader could reread the sentence rather than continuing on, and that could be a signal of, can we pause for a moment to discuss right now, so it's not lost by the end of the section, whatever that is.
I was about to say something like that. So I'm glad you brought it up, Mary. When a person is reading and it's like they have no idea what they're saying, and the reading, there's reading with feeling and following, and all of us will have this. All of us. I've been reading it for how many years, and a lot of people, especially since my internet connection is unstable every time I talk. So I really appreciate it when a person stops and says, I don't know what this is, or says, I'm going to reread it. I'd like to reread it, or just goes ahead and rereading. I'd like it to be free like that. That's my preference, is a kind of a freedom of the reader, because some of this is difficult. Sri Aurobindo said it was difficult. The mother said, this kind of poetry is not for everybody. But it's so wonderful. So yeah, I'd like it if every reader felt free to stop and go back, or ask for guidance in the middle, wherever they wanted, wherever they were lost. And I appreciate that kind of humility.
It's always fun for me personally. It's been funny and ironic in my interior state that when I lose presence, I actually need the self-awareness to even understand that I've lost presence. So I'm reading along, and sometimes I just go into autopilot, and maybe I don't even have the awareness to know that I'm in autopilot. And so I guess any form of coming into awareness, anyone else that's even not reading, I think I would appreciate if everyone felt the freedom to call pause or call reverse or to slow it down, because it's one of the most difficult things is staying present. And then there's like different layers. If I can stay present, the experiences start happening. And then sometimes experiences that are happening take me out of the presence of what's going on. Like my experience has me 6 lines back and we've moved 6 lines forward, and I'm toggling between honoring that experience and staying present with the shifting. So there's always a lot going on with Savitri. I think it has the potential of concrete spiritual realizations, things that stay with us for a lifetime. And it's nice to have space around that, and the freedom to just move as a group. I appreciate what everyone's expressing, and I suppose we'll start next session and see. I think the next session is the first Wednesday of August, and I don't know the date, but we can consult a calendar. Or does everyone feel kind of complete with going forward with me starting as facilitator and working with what's moving through the group and going from there? Yeah. Good.
Yeah. Yes, I am. I would love if we read the author, if we start with reading the author's note. I mean, as part of whatever overview somebody wants to give.
I think that would be a great spot to start. Could you start us off by, first of all, does everyone have a copy of Savitri with them? And does not all copies of Savitri have the author's note in it? So there's a publisher's note, but that's not what Andrea is talking about. Right after the table of contents, there's an author's note. Is your copy has that, Marco? Yeah, Mary, Marco, yeah.
If you mean me, yes.
Yeah, Marco's good. Andrea, that would be great. Could you read that?
Yes, I love to do it, and I'm delighted with this whole thing. It's wonderful to meet all of you. I feel just really my heart's full and open. That's a good place to be. I'm looking forward to sharing Sri Aurobindo's amazing transmission with you all.
Would you like to read, Andrea? The author's note?
Sorry, would you like for me to read that page now? Yeah? Okay, here we go. This is the author's note. The tale of Satyavan and Savitri is recited in the Mahabharata as a story of conjugal love conquering death. But this legend is, as shown by many features of the human tale, one of the many symbolic myths of the Vedic cycle. Satyavan is the soul carrying the divine truth of being within itself, but descended into the grip of death and ignorance. Savitri is the divine word, daughter of the sun, goddess of the supreme truth, who comes down and is born to save. Aswapati, the lord of the horse, her human father, is the lord of tapasya, the concentrated energy of spiritual endeavor that helps us to rise from the mortal to the immortal planes. Diumatsena, lord of the shining hosts, father of Satyavan, is the divine mind here fallen blind, losing its celestial kingdom of vision, and through that loss, its kingdom of glory. Still, this is not a mere allegory. The characters are not personified qualities, but incarnations or emanations of living and conscious forces with whom we can enter into concrete touch. And they take human bodies in order to help man and show him the way from his mortal state to a divine consciousness and immortal life. I'll read that little part again. The characters are not personified qualities, but incarnations or emanations of living and conscious forces with whom we can enter into concrete touch. Thank you. Okay.
John Robert, I'm hesitant to put you on the spot, but would you like to, are you inspired to start us off with kind of an introduction to the narrative arc? But I don't mean to put you on the spot. I could easily start too, but I've heard you do this. And
sorry, Mateo. I didn't know that we were going to be an hour and a half. And
do you need to go?
I need to go. So
okay.
I'll see you all next time.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you, Andrea. The narrative arc. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to go through the table of contents, but that's a good way to do it. Maybe we could do that the next time, or maybe we can do it later this time if we have time. So I'm just going to talk about the story I was talking about before. Basically, Savitri is written in two parts. The first part is the book of Aswapati, who's Savitri's father. And it happens before Savitri is born. So it's all the preparation that he makes, what his situation and the preparations that he makes, and is given, all the revelations and inspirations that he's given that lead to his aspiration for a change in the earth and the response of the divine, which is ultimately the promise of an emanation of the Divine Mother, who will be his daughter. So that's the first part. And the second part is all about Savitri. So it's about her birth, about her youth, growing up, about when she comes of age, there's no one who's willing to approach her to be her partner in her work. And so her father comes upon her walking through, and all of a sudden he remembers who she is. And he says to her that since no one has come to be your partner, for her to go out in the world and find the person that's going to be the one that will go with her in life. And so she sets off on this journey by herself, or perhaps the volume doesn't say. She sets out looking for her soulmate for the work. And after many adventures, she finds him, and there's this incredible poetry of love where Sri Aurobindo describes how they meet and what that meeting is like. And they recognize each other from many, many, many lives before. And so after, and almost immediately, it's like they've given their lives to each other. And so Savitri gets back on her chair in her chariot, tells Satyavan that she has to go back and tell her father, and that will be the last time they will part during this life. And she goes back to tell her father that she's found this person. And when she gets back there, the king, Ashwapati, and his wife are being visited by Narad, the divine messenger. Messenger is something a little bit like Mercury in Western mythology, the messenger of the gods. And he's singing, he transmits by singing. He's singing about love and life. And so when Savitri comes in, the sage, I'm getting some interruptions here, let me stop. When Savitri comes in, her father and her mother are meeting with him, and the sage notices that she's filled with love, and yet there's something going on. And so there's a discussion, and finally her mother says, what is it that you're seeing? Is this her perfect marriage or not? This is her true partner. And he says to her, after much prodding, that they will have 1 year together, and at the end of that year, Satyavan must die. Her husband will die. And so that brings up a whole turmoil, especially in the mother's heart. And Sri Aurobindo goes deep into the problem of death and evil and how that can be in the world. And so Savitri is firm in her choice. And so she goes back with Satyavan, and they live in a hermitage in the forest with his father and mother. His father is a blind king. He was exiled from his kingdom, and when he was exiled, he lost his sight. And so they live in this magnificent forest at the root of the mountains. And Savitri is brooding on this knowledge that she has. She doesn't share it with anyone, that within a year, he's going to die. And that knowledge stimulates the beginning of her own sadhana. So she's already this incredible being, the daughter of the sun, but she's human also. And so she begins the search for her own soul. And so Sri Aurobindo takes us through the steps that she goes through to find and unite with her own inner soul. And with that, she's ready to deal with the situation of Satyavan's death. And the day comes, he's struck by death, and at that moment of his death, he's lying on, his head is on Savitri's lap in the forest, and she looks up and she sees death. And so the culmination of this yoga, of this epic, is this conflict between Savitri, who insists that her husband stay with her in this life so they can accomplish the work, and Death, who insists that the laws of nature be followed and that he has died and he has to go to the underworld with him. And it turns into what Srubindo's called the debate between love and death. And it goes over multiple cantos. And in the end, Savitri realizes all of this time, more and more of her, the truth of her being is coming to her. And at the culmination of this debate, the Divine Mother manifests her completeness in Savitri, and Death is overcome by the force and light of the Divine Shakti and retreats. And then instead of just going back to their place in the forest, they're transmitted into the presence of the Satchidananda, of the Supreme Light. And Savitri recognizes at that point that this being of light that she encounters in the other realm, in the heavenly realm, let's say, is the same as the death being that she was confronting. That was this mask of darkness and power. And so she goes through the temptations to leave Earth behind and enjoy eternal bliss and beatitude with her husband Satyavan in the realms of light. And each temptation that he gives her, she refuses and instead asks for the boons that the divine is offering her in this life after death, to be sent back with them to Earth. And so at the end of it, there's an epilogue where Sri Aurobindo writes what happens when they wake up together in the forest on the same day. This is 24,000 lines later, on the same day in the forest. And what happens as they go back and meet his parents who live there. So I said that Savitri is divided into two parts, but actually the first two cantos in book one are the day that Satyavan dies. So in the first canto, Sri Aurobindo introduces us in incredible mythological language to the situation of the dawning of the day when Satyavan will die. So we start off with Savitri and Satyavan. The second canto is called The Issue, and it kind of gives us some background, because at the end of the canto one, Sri Aurobindo says, and this is the day when Satyavan must die. And by then we don't know anything about it. It's like, what does this mean that Satyavan is going to die? We don't even know who Satyavan is at this point. So Sri Aurobindo in the next canto gives us, canto 2, he gives us some background of who Savitri is. And from then on, we flash back to the time before Savitri was born, when her father who's a king of a realm, is trying to understand why life is the way it is, and goes through his own sadhana, and then realizes his being, realizes his soul, and then agrees or is inspired to take up the sadhana of the world in order so that the whole world can have the kind of realization that he has as an individual. And so that's the first part of the book that goes through his own sadhana. So we get to see basically Sri Aurobindo's sadhana in the first half of the book and Mother's sadhana in the second half of the book.
Thank you, John. That was a really wonderful summary, wonderful outline. That's exactly that kind of grand vision that I was talking about. It gives it an understanding and sets a base on which then by reading one can perhaps understand better things. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I think it will help to do what Mateo suggested also, which is to go through the table of contents, because it's a complex story. But if you just think about it as being in two parts, that kind of gives you the bare bones of the narrative.
I have a question. I read that Aurobindo was working on the poem when he died, and so it was unfinished in a way. Does the narrative arc that you described, is that complete, or was it going somewhere further that he didn't get to finish writing?
The narrative.
Go ahead, Mateo.
The narrative arc is complete, and what was left unfinished, he was asked about, and he said, "Well, I'll leave that till later." And there's almost the implication that he was okay with the point to which he brought the poem, which was maybe a half a year before he passed. So the sections that were left incomplete were the Book of Death and the Epilogue. And the Book of Death, there's only one, I can't remember what book number it is, but there's only one canto, and it's designated Canto 3. So whatever book that is, the Book of Death after the Book of Yoga. So it must be Book 8. Let's have a quick look at the table of contents. That you'll
Yes.
feel the poetry. The poetry's different. He actually wrote that probably in the teens, or the 1920 or the teens, and he left it kind of undone. And there is a whole history that we could talk about how Savitri evolved over between 1900 and 1950. It's something that he was working on continuously, and there are sections that kind of dropped into being in 1949, 1950, somewhere in there that we can talk about eventually. But the narrative arc is quite complete. The story that he wanted to convey is quite complete. The other canto that he left untouched was the Epilogue, the Return to Earth. It's a beautiful canto. But I think especially after reading the entirety, even when we get to Book 8, you'll be able to feel that the poetry is different. There's a different transmission in the poetry. Yeah, and we will have time to, I think we should keep revisiting the narrative arc as we go, keep reestablishing the base, and I'm more than happy to help with that. I love the way John Roberts looking at this. Book 1, Cantos 1 and 2, the symbol dawn and the issue. If we were to make a linear map of Savitri, those two books would actually exist after Book 7 and before Book 8 in linear time.
I think you mean those two cantos, Mateo, right?
Did I say those two books? Yes,
Yeah.
I meant those two cantos. The Book 1, Cantos 1 and 2 exist in linear time, exist after Book 7 and before Book 8. So they kind of plug right into there. And then looking at the table of contents, Canto 3, the Yoga of the King. And I say this, John Roberts said this, but I'm repeating it because it's not mentioned. It's not explicit in the story. Ashwapati is not even mentioned until Book 6, or I'm sorry, but the book he's not even mentioned by name until way later on. We'll see it. My guess is it's Book 6, the Book of Fate, when his name actually gets mentioned, but it might be Book 3. It's somewhere deep into the book. So it's not explicit But this book 1, Canto 3, the Yoga of the King, that king is Ashwapati, and it's actually, some people see it as a flashback in time. Some people see it as just a break in the narrative arc and it kind of jumping around in time. But that's the distinction. That's the kind of the distinct marker. And I think we'll keep walking through it as we go. But this might be a good place to say to be continued, and we'll pick up and with a little talking the first Wednesday of August, and start reading then and approaching then. And I don't need to have the last word if anyone else wants to say anything or have any other questions. One thing I remembered about the Life Divine group is there was a flux time to end. There was a window between like an hour and a half and 2 hours. And there is something nice about not being completely rigid about ending on the minute at half past the hour. But again, it's how the group feels about that and what people have time for.
I could be fuzzy. I think hour and a half works better for my regular schedule, but going a little bit over isn't a problem for me.
My preference is also to always begin with a meditation and to end with a meditation, even if it's just a minute or two. Is everyone okay with that? Yeah.
I'm fine with it.
Does anyone else have anything to add to this discussion before we end with a meditation?
Just appreciation to everybody.
Mm-hmm. I forgot to talk about one thing, in that John Robert and I were talking about this. The group is an open group. If we're all okay with that, people may come that aren't here today, and I'd like to facilitate an open and welcome invitation to anyone that's not here and wants to join. And if someone comes in that hasn't come in before, I'd like to facilitate space for them to introduce themselves and to be with us, and they can. I don't think we'll do an introductory session for everyone every time. The sessions are recorded, so people that are coming in that are new that would like to look at the introductory session are welcome, and we'll go from there. And I appreciate everyone's presence, who's here and not here and participating in cyberspace. And thank you, Marco, for this lovely platform. I would also like to talk with you about utilizing this platform for other nonprofits and things like that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you for being here and using it and utilizing it. That's what it's here for. This brings great richness and pleasure to my life, and I know like others who come across these kinds of things. It's not, you know, a huge crowd, but for those who do and go deep, I think it's really satisfying to be able, even if they're not present in real time as we're doing it, to be able to follow along. I know people do that, and I've heard their feedback on you know, how valuable it is to them. So, you know, whatever we can offer in that regard, I think it's just added benefit. So thanks.
Yes, Marco, I agree totally with you. It is really, I believe it is really of big value also for those who eventually listen to this offline. Because I know this by my own experience. I also listen to a lot of other talks and so. And Mateo, only a short question. What about Florian? Does he know?
Oh, he texted. Yes, he does. He's on the road. He's on the road for 2 or 3 weeks and has conflict.
Okay. No, but he knows in any case.
He knows he will be with us, and yeah.
Okay.
See you all the first Wednesday of August, and thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Nice to meet you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you all.
Mm-hmm.
Bye-bye.